Welcome to Museum Archipelago. I'm Ian Elsner. Museum Archipelago guides you through the rocky landscape of museums. Each episode is rarely longer than 15 minutes. So let's get started. Buzludzha comes up a lot on Museum Archipelago. The monument was built in 1981 to look like a futuristic flying saucer perched high in the Bulgarian mountains. Every detail of the visitor experience was designed to impress, to show how Bulgarian communism was the way of the future. Once inside, visitors were treated to an immersive light show, where the mosaics of Marx and Lenin and Bulgarian partisan battles were illuminated at dramatic moments during a pre-recorded narration. But within a year of Buzludzha welcoming its first guests, all the way across the world in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, another museum opened to promote the exact opposite message. And it even had a flying saucer connection.
The framing device of the museum is you have these two alien puppets that crash down in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, and they need to get fuel for their spaceship so they can go back. I saw these animatronic puppets and I was like, oh, well, this is just like Disney World, except they're talking about having to commodify their space technology so they can buy gold to put in their spaceship so they can get back to their planet or whatever.
This is Barrett Huddleston, who first visited Enterprise Square, USA as an elementary school student in the mid-1980s, and later worked there as a tour guide.
Hi, my name is Barrett Huddleston. I am an educational enrichment provider. I own a business called Mat Science of Central Oklahoma and Finer Arts of Oklahoma. I travel all over my state and a few others, delivering STEAM-based workshops and assemblies to elementary school students.
The story of Enterprise Square USA begins in a boom. Actually, a few overlapping booms. In the late 1970s, oil had been found in the nearby Anadarko Basin, and energy companies and money were rushing into Oklahoma City. As Sam Anderson puts it in his excellent book, Boomtown, which is also where I first learned about this museum, capitalism had blessed Oklahoma City, and the city wanted to express its thanks. At the height of the boom, local businessmen pooled their money to create a brand new attraction that, even by the standards of Oklahoma City, was spectacularly strange. It was an interactive museum, a kind of secular shrine to free enterprise, designed to help local children appreciate the sanctity of capitalism.
I think at that point in the state of Oklahoma, it was 1 out of every 6 or 8 people were either directly or indirectly employed by big energy in one respect. Now it's way, way, way lower than that. And we've got a much more diversified economy. But Enterprise Square was also attached to a evangelical Christian university at a time where there was a lot of deregulation in education because of the Reagan administration. So if you were evangelical and if you were pro laissez-faire capitalism, then you were definitely going to get the kind of funding that it would take from the donor class to build a museum for children that was pro-free market.
Huddleston also turned me on to a different kind of boom. The baby boomers' children were beginning to go to college around this time too. Echo booms are always a bit more diffuse than the original boom, since people choose to have children at different times. But pretty much any college or university in the country, including Oklahoma Christian University, which hosted the museum on their campus, could expect increasing enrollment year after year, no matter what they did.
Enterprise Square opened in 1982, and I believe as early as first, second, or third grade, school trips were being taken there, and I must have been about 7 or 8 years old. So much of my childhood education was sort of, that curriculum was created between the Great Society and the Reagan administration. So a lot of the education that I got as hand-me-down education from the previous generation was very pro-regulation, very pro-safe market approaches, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that by the time that Enterprise Square came along, it was like, well, no, we need to unlearn what these kids have learned in school and then retrain them about how bad regulation can be and how wonderful a free market can be and how they need to really pay attention to the weather forecast if they're going to make their own lemonade stands and that kind of thing.
And it's clear from the contemporary news coverage, like this one from Action 4 in Oklahoma City, that Enterprise Square USA represented something different.
This is the first group to tour the nation's only museum devoted solely to free enterprise. The $15 million Enterprise Square USA has been 6 years in the making. Every penny and minute of time spent shows up in a big way on the inside. It's an economic learning experience, and with a touch of animation, it's Disneyland in a classroom. But there's more. These digital readouts update all sorts of nationwide figures, minute by minute, on employment, taxes, traffic deaths, and so on. Dan Slocum, Action 4 at Enterprise Square.
Disney comes up a lot in these discussions about Enterprise Square USA. Epcot, Disney's second park in Florida, opened just 1 month before Enterprise Square in October 1982.
And if I remember correctly, one of the mechanics that designed Enterprise Square was an Imagineer from Epcot.
Even the museum's name evokes Main Street USA, a Disney-themed area that's an amalgamation of feelings or memory or history rather than a specific place. In the late 1950s, eyeing expansion of his Disneyland park, Walt Disney developed, but never built, a spur off of Main Street USA that was to be called Edison Square, dedicated to all things progress and industry. It's hard not to see the connection. Another connection is the audio-animatronics, reading from Boomtown Again. Next to the world's largest cash register, 4 enormous paper bills hung on the wall, and their giant founding father heads sang a barbershop quartet about freedom. The animatronic faces jerking around like figures in a Chuck E. Cheese band.
We're talking business.
You've got a barbershop quartet of sort of the Hall of Presidents heads of George Washington and Benjamin Franklin and Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson singing about freedom, freedom, freedom. They're inside the paper currency. It's hollowed out. When I was a tour guide, I remember on several occasions, Thomas Jefferson had a tendency to just break down by that time because it had been 15 or 20 years. So because I was the smallest tour guide, they would remove his head and shove me through his $2 bill and have me get back there with a pair of needle nose pliers and
Oh my God.
cut the blue wire so that Thomas Jefferson could sing about freedom again. Yeah.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I thought you were going to say they replaced the animatronic with you.
No.
The reason why these animatronics were in such rough shape had to do with the opposite of the boom, the bust. Even by the time Enterprise Square opened in November 1982, the bust had already begun. That July, one of Oklahoma's major banks collapsed.
Because of either oil sanctions or deregulation of oil in the Middle East. So all of our petroleum business in the state kind of went belly up. And after spending 5 years and I don't know how many millions of dollars putting Enterprise Square together, the museum suddenly kind of found itself in a situation where nobody could afford to go there. And the university that had established it really couldn't afford to keep it up.
The museum that was meant to celebrate capitalism's triumph found itself out of money almost from the jump. Enterprise Square USA was kept in its original form, with only a few small changes to the exhibits, until it finally closed in 1999. In that way, it outlived Buzludzha, which became a ruin when the Bulgarian communist government collapsed in 1989.
And it wasn't just that they weren't changed, but that they weren't maintained. So it was constantly putting duct tape on top of Band-Aids, on top of string, to get things to work. And by the end, we were having to manually change all of the statistics every day in the Hall of Statistics because, for example, the population rate was actually growing greater than what it said on the little ticker in the United States.
It was during the last 2 years of operation that Huddleston started working at the museum.
It was a work-study position. And as far as work-study positions go, you weren't scrubbing toilets. It was very rare that a school group would come in. So really, you were just sitting behind a desk and reading Stephen King novels. I would say that on average, I had a 2 or 3 hour shift every day. And I would say I had about 3 tours that I would give every day. And my specialty was the donut shop, because I could play off of the animatronic donut shop robot pretty well.
So this was the supply and demand donut shop.
Supply and demand, Doc the robot. You go into the donut shop, it's just a series of small desks in which you're pressing buttons. It's kind of a lot like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, where you press buttons and all of the information that the audience presses goes up on this big board. If you're the tour guide, you're asking them questions about, how many donuts should we make? Sugar costs this much and milk is costing this much. We want to get this much profit. And then this robot comes out with a little chef's hat, and he's about an 8-foot robot. His name's Doc. And you have a script in front of you, but, after about 4 or 5 times, you memorize the script just out of habit. And you talk to Doc. Doc talks to you.
What do you remember about the way visitors reacted?
There was definitely an age threshold. Like, if you were under 9 years old, man, this is great. There's talking puppets, and I shot a turkey with a dollar bill, and, like that kind of stuff. Because, it's like Chuck E. Cheese, and it's a day off from school. I should say that all of the students at Oklahoma Christian got, quote unquote, free admission to Enterprise Square. So, if you're a kid who's being sent to Enterprise Square because you're in a freshman level business econ class, you can imagine.
For Huddleston, his time maintaining talking presidents and bantering with robot chefs has influenced how he thinks about education and authority. Today, Huddleston works as an educational enrichment provider, running workshops for elementary school students.
As far as my education goes, I think children today are so savvy that whenever I perform, for example, in an assembly, my character name is called Professor Bunglebotch. And my shtick is that I do everything wrong so that the kids catch me and go, that's not right. That's not right. So I think that probably began gestating as part of that disillusionment of I want the kids to think as critically as possible. If they are put in front of an adult and suddenly they realize this adult doesn't know what they're doing, we might be in trouble. Not only does it make it more engaging for them, but now they've learned that, I can do this with every adult.
This inversion of authority feels particularly pointed, given Enterprise Square USA's conviction in its message. But as my mother, who grew up in communist Bulgaria, often reminds me, people are pretty good at filtering through propaganda, particularly when it feels like propaganda.
The smell test for me is always, are you expecting everybody to have an identical response to this? And especially should the audience have the exact same response as the performer or the attraction. I think critical thinking begins with, if I'm performing, if I'm mad, then the audience is glad. They're laughing at me getting mad about a silly thing. If I'm glad, then they're afraid because I'm about to do something dangerous that I don't know what I'm doing. But if you go into propaganda films, you're supposed to have the exact same reaction as whoever your protagonist is, and God, king, and country, and we're just excited about this.
Today, both Enterprise Square USA and Buzludzha stand empty, twin monuments to competing economic visions. Where one used mosaics of Marx and Lenin to show the inevitable march of communism, the other used singing founding framers to celebrate free market capitalism. Each was proud to share their simplified vision of the world outside their walls and confidently used the latest in visitor experience design to deliver it. I'm willing to bet that the builders of each never came across the other except in their own imaginations. This has been Museum Archipelago. I have 2 quick announcements about Club Archipelago, our bonus podcast. I've been having a lot of fun making Club Archipelago, which is kind of a mirror image of Museum Archipelago. While the main show examines the landscape of real museums, Club Archipelago is the podcast that examines museums through the lens of popular culture, like movies and video games. We've built up quite the collection of episodes, from the Night at the Museum series to Toy Story 2, and honestly, I think more people should listen. So I've just added a 7-day free trial to the Patreon. You can sign up, listen to as many episodes as you can, and cancel before the trial is up, completely absolved of any guilt. Of course, you're very welcome to hang around too. To get access to the free trial, just go to jointhemuseum.club. And finally, I'm discontinuing the sticker rewards of the Club Archipelago membership. It's just too much of a logistical challenge to ship things from Bulgaria. And I want to focus all my time on the much more scalable podcast production. But if you're interested, regardless of whether you're a club member or not, just send me an email and I'll let you know where the closest museum is where I've left a pile of stickers for you to collect. For a full transcript of this episode, as well as show notes and links, visit museumarchipelago.com. Thanks for listening. And next time, bring a friend. Durgun works at the Pergamon Museum, where those gate lions from Somal are perched. Well, some of them. Durgun works at the Pergamon Museum, where those gate lions from Somal are perched. Well, some of them.